When J.D. Vance confronted a relentless online troll in a public forum who had been spreading lies about him, he had two choices: ignore it or strike back. But instead, he did something no one saw coming. What started as a confrontation turned into a moment that left everyone speechless. And in today's divided world, that was truly unexpected. It all began with an online spat fueled by tweets and viral clips, snarky comments that escalated over months until the internet chatter became impossible to ignore. J.D. Vance, known for his best-selling memoir and political presence, had grown accustomed to critics and commentators, yet this particular troll had made it personal. Harsh allegations, half-truths, and personal insults were scattered across social media like confetti after a parade, each post sparking new threads of both support and condemnation. Thousands of users chimed in, some defending Vance, others piling on with the troll, each comment intensifying an already heated atmosphere. But words online often live in a vacuum. They come and go with fleeting attention. It's easy to dismiss hateful remarks as mere noise in the digital sphere until the day they materialize in person, until the moment those typed words are spoken aloud in the presence of real flesh and blood. That moment arrived on a crisp autumn evening in Cincinnati, where Vance had agreed to participate in a community forum focused on local issues. He came prepared to discuss economic development, child welfare, and the opioid crisis, topics he'd covered passionately throughout his career. Little did he know one of his fiercest online antagonists would show up unannounced. The auditorium itself was nothing extravagant, yet it held a certain gravitas. Rows of folding chairs faced a modest stage where a simple lectern bore the logo of the local community center. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the crowd gathered in neat lines, some wearing suits, others in casual attire, eager to hear J.D. Vance speak. At first glance, it seemed like any other small-town political event, yet beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of excitement. Rumors had circulated that the troll, the one whose biting comments had become famous online, had RSVP'd. The tension among those in the know felt electric. Would there be an altercation, a heated debate, or a grand spectacle of sarcasm and bravado? No one could predict how it would unfold, least of all J.D. Vance himself, who, though composed, felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a quiet yet unmistakable sense that something big was on the horizon. The community center stood at the edge of a once industrial district, factories, now silent, their rusted silos towering in the distance, a stark reminder of economic decline and the urgent need for revitalization. Inside the auditorium, folding chairs were placed in tidy rows. Maybe 200 seats in total. At the front was a simple stage bare, except for a wooden podium and a microphone set to broadcast every word to both the crowd and a local news crew, positioned near the back with camera tripods and light rigs. A mural adorned one side of the auditorium, vibrant but aged, depicting scenes of Cincinnati's storied past, riverboats floating down the Ohio, diverse workers forging a bustling economy. It was a tableau that suggested resilience and unity, two qualities desperately needed in modern discourse. J.D. Vance arrived early, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, his expression one of practiced calm, despite the swirl of social media speculation. In one hand, a slim folder containing bullet points for his speech; in the other, a phone that buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues, friends, advising caution, and well-wishers encouraging him to stay strong. Organizers greeted him politely, relieved he had shown up despite the online drama. They knew attendance would be higher tonight. They'd seen the forum's sign-up list balloon practically overnight. Word travels fast in the digital age, especially when controversy is at stake. The seats began filling up quickly. Local residents curious about Vance's ideas, students who saw him as an author whose memoir had shaped their perspectives, activists eager to push for social change, and journalists armed with cameras, digital recorders, and a thirst for sound bites. In the far corner near the exit, two older men whispered to each other in hushed, conspiratorial tones. They recognized the troll from his social media avatar, a grainy profile photo that had circulated widely. They pointed and murmured, as if they'd spotted a minor celebrity or a ghost. And there he was indeed, the online antagonist in the flesh, leaning against the wall, arms crossed over his chest, eyes scanning the room with a mix of wariness and bravado. He wore a hoodie and jeans, an outfit that contrasted sharply with the more formal attire of many attendees. To some, he was known by a handle that evoked cynicism and snark. His tweets had garnered thousands of likes and retweets, each one more vitriolic than the last. He often boasted about telling it like it is, though critics simply called him mean-spirited. Regardless of interpretation, His presence was now undeniable. His gaze flickered from the stage to J.D. Vance, as if appraising a rival boxer in the opposite corner of the ring. The hush in the auditorium grew thick like a slow-building storm. People settled into their seats, occasional coughs or whispers breaking the silence. The clock on the wall read 6:58 p.m., just 2 minutes until the event's official start. J.D. Vance glanced at his watch, took a breath, and stepped up to the podium. J.D. Vance, a best-selling author whose memoir detailed the struggles of growing up in Appalachia, a region often misunderstood and stereotyped, he had become a notable figure in political circles. His stance on economic reform, community building, and bridging divides between rural and urban America had earned him both praise and criticism. Vance was neither the type to back down nor the type to lash out recklessly. He carried himself with a certain earnestness, the kind that suggested a genuine desire to help, tempered by the reality of political life, where sincerity is often met with skepticism or hostility. He went by an online handle that projected an aura of anger and cynicism, posting scathing takedowns of politicians, celebrities, and anyone else who drew his ire. He prided himself on exposing hypocrisy, though critics claimed he was little more than a bully seeking attention. In a world saturated with digital discourse, his posts had found an audience, people who relished the snark, who reveled in the humor he derived from humiliating others. The line between critique and cruelty was often blurred, but he never seemed to mind. Now these two personalities stood in the same room, one armed with personal conviction and a microphone, the other armed with a phone, a Twitter account, and a smirk that dared the world to challenge him. Vance cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone, and began. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of countless interviews and speeches before. "Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm here to discuss issues that affect not just this community, but our state, and in many ways, our entire nation." He thanked the organizers for hosting the forum, complimented the local volunteers for their efforts, and acknowledged the presence of reporters, journalists, and curious citizens who had come to learn more about his views. It was all standard procedure, at first a litany of thanks and polite acknowledgments, but the aura of anticipation in the room was impossible to ignore. People weren't here just for policy points, they were waiting for a showdown, though few would dare say it aloud. Vance introduced his topics, spoke passionately about the opioid crisis, how it had ravaged towns in Ohio and beyond. He talked about the need for comprehensive approaches, not just policing, but rehabilitation programs, mental health support, and job training initiatives. The crowd listened attentively, some nodding in agreement, others jotting down notes. The reporters captured every word on camera or in shorthand. Then he touched on economic opportunity, on bridging the gap between wealthy coastal cities and the struggling rural regions that feel left behind. He spoke of his own journey growing up in a family haunted by addiction and the challenges he faced attaining higher education. He wanted to see more success stories like his, minus the hardships. Occasionally, he'd look out into the crowd, never lingering on any one face for too long. Yet he knew somewhere among those dozens of eyes the troll was there, listening, watching, waiting. A part of him wondered, would the troll speak up, launch into an accusation or humiliating tirade, or would he vanish into the background as an observer, silently collecting ammunition for another online onslaught? These thoughts flickered through his mind, but he maintained a calm exterior, steering his speech with poise and confidence. The minutes ticked by the clock, nearing 7:20 p.m. After covering several talking points, Vance signaled he would open the floor for questions immediately. A handful of hands shot up, some from local residents eager to raise concerns about property taxes or school funding, one from a journalist who wanted clarity on his stance regarding a recent policy debate. But the troll remained motionless, arms still crossed, gaze fixed on Vance, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Vance called on a woman in the front row who asked about local businesses and entrepreneurial grants. He responded in depth, offering ideas on public-private partnerships, citing examples of success in neighboring cities. Then he fielded questions about infrastructure, public transportation, the environment. With each response, the troll's smirk seemed to deepen. Finally, Vance gestured to the back of the room, inviting another question. A man in a baseball cap turned and pointed. "Actually, I think he's got something to say," the man said, his voice tinged with nervous excitement. Everyone pivoted in their seats, searching for the figure singled out. Eyes landed on the troll, still leaning against the wall, still silent until now. The troll stepped forward with calculated slowness, his footsteps echoing as he approached the open aisle. No microphone was set up for audience questions, so he had to raise his voice. "Yeah, I do have something to say," he began, his tone laced with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "I've been watching your speeches, JD, reading your interviews. I've seen how you frame yourself as this champion of the little guy, but I think it's a sham." A ripple of murmurs spread through the auditorium. Some eyebrows shot up, others frowned in disapproval, but nearly everyone leaned in, eyes trained on this confrontation. Vance nodded, slowly acknowledging the comment. "All right," he said in a measured tone. "I'm listening." Encouraged by the fact that all eyes were now on him, the troll continued. "You talk about your upbringing, about how tough it was. Then you go on TV and act like you've got all the answers. How can you really understand what people are going through when you've become part of the establishment?" A few gasps dotted the room. The troll was hitting personal notes, questioning Vance's authenticity. It was a rhetorical punch to the gut, aimed at undermining his credibility and sincerity. Vance took a measured breath. He'd heard accusations like this before, but never delivered so bluntly in person, with cameras rolling and a crowd watching intently. "I understand your concern," Vance began calmly. "But if you read my story, you know that I never claim to have all the answers. What I do have is experience, some of it painful. I use that to inform my perspective and propose solutions. That's why I'm here, listening to people directly." The troll rolled his eyes dramatically. The crowd seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next verbal volley. The troll's voice rose in volume, tinged with frustration. "You say you're listening, but are you really? Or are these events just photo ops? You write a book, you get famous, and then you profit off the same people you claim you want to help." Scattered murmurs of disapproval at his tone, mixed with pockets of individuals who nodded, as if agreeing. The auditorium vibrated with a low hum of tension. Vance glanced around, gauging the audience's reaction. His posture remained composed, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the lectern. "I think you've misunderstood my intentions," he replied. "Yes, I wrote a book about my life. I never denied that it became successful. But do you know what motivated me to write it? It wasn't fame. It was a desire to share a perspective that was missing in mainstream conversations, to shine a light on communities often overlooked." He paused, briefly scanning the onlookers, then continued, voice steady. "If that's made me part of an establishment, as you call it, then let's redefine what establishment means. Because I'm not interested in playing power games. I'm interested in tackling real problems, from poverty to drug addiction. And that's why I'm here, face to face, answering your questions." The troll laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the tension. "This is what I'm talking about," he exclaimed. "That smooth talk, that politician's flair for saying a lot without really saying anything. You think you can just stand there and feed us more of the same lines?" All eyes were on them now. The reporters in the back angled their cameras, zooming in to capture every shift in expression, every bead of sweat, every twitch of tension. Yet Vance's calm did not waver. He leaned forward slightly, hands gripping the edges of the lectern. "I'm here," he said again, "and I'm not running from these accusations. If you have concerns, I'll address them. But I'd also like to know, what do you propose? What solutions do you see for the problems you're highlighting?" The troll blinked, as if caught off guard by the directness of the question. "Me?" he stammered, momentarily losing his edge. "I'm just a regular guy. It's not my job to fix everything. That's supposed to be your job." Vance nodded thoughtfully. "Then help me do it. Tell me your ideas. Because real change requires collective effort, not just pointing out flaws." A wave of murmured approval rippled through the audience at Vance's response. Some recognized it as a pivot, a skillful way to shift accountability. Others saw it as sincere, a genuine call for collaborative problem-solving. But the troll wasn't quite ready to yield. He took a step forward, arms unfolding, voice becoming more strident. "Collective effort? You say that, but look at your past statements. You've spoken out against some programs that would have helped people struggling with jobs or health insurance. I follow your record, JD. I don't just read your book. I read your policies." He tapped his temple with one finger. "And I remember." The crowd's temperature rose another degree. Someone near the front frowned. Crossing their arms, a couple in the middle row exchanged uneasy glances. Was the troll raising valid policy critiques, or simply trying to provoke Vance into a slip-up? Vance inhaled, steadying himself. He glanced at his folder, though he didn't open it. He wanted to address these points from memory. Which policies are you referring to? He asked, voice calm. Let's talk specifics. The troll rattled off a few proposals Vance had once supported or opposed, latching onto headlines and viral hashtags that had circulated online for months. He cited tweets, op-eds, interviews, stringing them together in a tapestry of alleged contradictions. For someone who claims to care about working-class folks, the troll sneered. You sure have a funny way of showing it. Silence stretched. Taut and heavy, Vance nodded slowly, absorbing the critique. Policies evolve, he said finally. And so do people. When I started in the public eye, I had certain views. But I've learned a lot since then, through conversations, studies, experiences. I've changed my stance on some issues, clarified my positions on others. That's not flip-flopping, it's growing. If we never allow our perspectives to adapt with new information, we end up stuck in dogma. That helps no one. A murmur of assent rolled through part of the crowd. People recognized a nuance in Vance's explanation. The troll, however, crossed his arms again, clearly unconvinced. With tension already running high, the troll decided to push further. You talk a big game, JD, about humility and growth, but let's not forget you're the guy who leveraged your own family's struggles for clout. How is that not exploitative? How is that not capitalizing on pain? Gasps scattered across the auditorium. The troll's accusation landed like a punch, hitting a deeply personal note that few dared to bring up so publicly. Vance's jaw tightened for a moment. He didn't speak. The room felt charged, as if the overhead fluorescence flickered with every heartbeat. He finally exhaled, controlling his tone as he responded. It's a fair question, he acknowledged, voice low but clear. Writing about my family's struggles was painful, but I did it because I believed and still believe that shining a light on those struggles can bring us closer to addressing them. Do you think it was easy to lay bare those hardships for the world to see? To read judgments from strangers on something so personal? No, it wasn't. But it was necessary if I wanted to start an honest conversation. He paused, eyes scanning the audience, then returning to the troll. And yes, that book made me known. But the recognition also gave me a platform to advocate for the very communities I wrote about. If that's exploitation, it's a strange kind, because I continue to invest my time and energy into helping the same regions and people I came from. The troll opened his mouth, ready to fire back another retort, but paused. Something in Vance's tone, or maybe the collective hush in the room, stilled him. Yet the troll was not ready to concede entirely. A woman in the third row stood up, glaring at the troll. "Stop harassing him," she shouted. "Did you even read the book? Have you done anything for this community aside from mocking people online?" Several attendees clapped, while others whispered for calm. The troll looked around, momentarily flustered by the crowd's reaction, but soon found backup from a man 2 rows behind. "He's got a point," the man shouted in the troll's defense. "I respect JD, but it's fair to question politicians, especially if they've changed positions. We need honesty." A swirl of voices rose, some supporting Vance, some echoing the troll's concerns. The moderator of the event stepped to the side of the stage, arms raised in an attempt to restore order. "Please, everyone, one at a time," the moderator said into a handheld mic. "We want to maintain a respectful environment." But the simmering tension had boiled over. People were no longer just passively watching. They were choosing sides, debating and defending in hushed or not-so-hushed voices. The air hummed with confrontation. Vance held a hand up, signaling for calm slowly. The voices quieted. The troll, still standing near the center aisle, wore an expression of guarded defiance. Sensing the turmoil in the room, Vance took a step away from the lectern. "Let's lower the temperature," he said gently. "No one gains from shouting matches." He turned to the troll, his eyes steady. "Listen, I get why you're angry. You've probably seen politicians promise things over and over, then fail to deliver. It's natural to be skeptical, maybe even cynical, but I'm standing right here, in front of you. We can actually talk." A hush fell again. The troll studied Vance, trying to determine if this was genuine or just another political maneuver. "You're giving me the floor?" the troll asked, arms uncrossing slowly. "For how long?" "As long as you stay respectful and constructive," Vance replied. "I genuinely want to hear your concerns, but let's do it in a way that fosters understanding, not just another shouting match." A hesitant nod from the troll. Clearly, he hadn't expected to be invited into a dialogue so openly. A flicker of uncertainty darted across his face. In an unexpected twist, the troll started to speak, not just about policy or politics, but about himself. "You want to know why I get so riled up?" he said, voice trembling slightly. "I was laid off last year. My wife left me right after, took the kids, and I've been scraping by on gig work. Meanwhile, I watch these politicians come and go, promise us the moon, and then vanish." He swallowed hard, his tone raw. "I see you on TV talking about opportunities, about how we can fix things. But it never feels real. It feels like talk. So yeah, maybe I lash out online. Maybe I'm too harsh. But it's easier to be angry than to be disappointed yet again." A quiet settled over the auditorium, far deeper than before. People leaned forward, captivated, some with sympathetic frowns, others with eyes that shimmered with unspoken empathy. Vance nodded solemnly. "Thank you for sharing that," he said softly. "I'm sorry you've gone through such hardships. You're right. People have been let down, time and again. But that doesn't mean we should give up on finding solutions. We just have to be smarter, more persistent, and more honest." The troll's features softened, if only slightly. An internal struggle played out on his face, somewhere between lingering anger and the stirrings of reluctant respect. For a moment, it seemed like the two might reach an understanding. The crowd sensed it too. The air felt thick with the potential for either a breakthrough or a final combustive clash. The troll cleared his throat. "So, what do you suggest? How do we move from fancy speeches to actual change?" A fair question, direct, urgent. Vance gestured for the troll to approach closer. "I've laid out some ideas already. Improved workforce training, better access to vocational programs, community college partnerships that help people retool their skill sets. But you tell me, do you see any of that happening around here? If not, why do you think it's failing?" The troll paused, uncertain if he should move forward then. Emboldened by curiosity and frustration, he stepped closer. His voice dropped a notch, as if he were speaking to Vance directly, rather than the entire room. "I tried to sign up for one of those so-called workforce training programs," he admitted. "They had a waiting list months long. By the time they had an opening, my unemployment ran out. I needed a job then and there. Couldn't wait." Heads in the crowd nodded, resonating with the predicament, the real-world complexities that sound so straightforward on paper, but in practice become labyrinthine obstacles. "I hear you," Vance replied. "This is why partial solutions are never enough. We need more robust funding and better infrastructure to support these programs. We need to expand them, staff them properly, reduce bureaucracy." He looked around the auditorium. "This isn't just my fight. It's all of ours. It's the local officials who run the programs, the state legislators who vote on budgets, the nonprofits who help fill the gaps." Then, turning back to the troll, his voice softened. "It's also about bridging the communication gap between people like me, who have a platform, and people like you, who are living the day-to-day struggle. I can't fix it alone. No single politician can. But maybe we can do more if we work together, if we actually talk and plan, instead of trading insults." Something subtle yet profound began to unfold in the room. Onlookers who had arrived hoping for a verbal brawl found themselves growing quiet, reflective. The moderator lowered his hands, letting the conversation flow organically. A middle-aged man in the audience rose. "No offense to either of you, but we hear a lot about these big ideas, and then they never materialize. What's different this time?" Vance folded his arms, considering the question. "What's different is that I'm not just talking at you. I'm talking with you," he said. "And I'm willing to keep doing so after tonight. That means follow-up meetings, planning sessions, phone calls. If there's a local committee set up to tackle these issues, I'll join it. If there isn't, let's create one." The troll's skeptical gaze lingered. He was clearly wrestling with the notion that someone he'd spent months vilifying online might genuinely want to collaborate. But the cracks in his armor began to show. The crowd sensed it too. People were shifting in their seats, less out of unease and more out of a cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't theater. Vance turned back to the troll, eyes earnest. "There's something I want to admit," he began. "When I first saw your posts online, yes, I've seen them, I felt anger. I thought, here's someone who's unfairly attacking me, who doesn't know me at all. But then I realized something. Behind that screen name was a human being. A person who might be going through hardships that I can't fully understand unless we talk." He exhaled, breaking eye contact for a brief moment. "It's easy to dehumanize each other online. to reduce a person to a handful of tweets or a quick label. We forget that each comment, each post, comes from a real life with its own joys and sorrows. A wave of empathy seemed to wash over the crowd. Reporters eyed each other. This wasn't the typical flame war turned real-life argument. It was evolving into something more nuanced and revealing. The troll blinked rapidly, as if trying to keep composure. You actually read my posts?" he asked, voice tinged with surprise. Vance nodded. "Some, yes. I won't lie. I almost blocked you at one point. But then I thought, if I can't handle tough criticism, I'm not fit to stand here and ask for people's trust." Murmurs spread through the crowd again. Some people exchanged glances of mild astonishment. The atmosphere had shifted from tension to a precarious sense of unity. In a moment that felt almost surreal, the troll extended his hand, hesitating briefly before offering it to Vance. "I'm not saying I trust you," he said, voice gruff. "But maybe I've said too much online without giving you a chance. And maybe I've let my personal struggles get in the way of hearing you out." Vance took the hand, shook it firmly but not aggressively. "I appreciate that," he replied softly, "and I'm willing to earn your trust. But let's do it the right way. Open dialogue, real follow-up, and tangible action." Applause erupted from various pockets of the auditorium, building into a crescendo. The troll looked around, slightly embarrassed but also taken aback by the positive reaction. As the tension ebbed, the moderator stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a brief pause before we continue with questions," he announced, voice somewhat shaky from the emotional weight of the evening. People rose from their seats, some heading for the exit to catch a breath of fresh air, others forming small clusters to discuss what they'd just witnessed. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the aftermath of a moment that felt simultaneously hopeful and raw. Reporters approached Vance and the troll microphones poised, eager for a statement. The troll shrank back, unused to being the center of attention in real life, while Vance answered a flurry of quick questions with practiced poise, his expression reflecting both relief and lingering emotion. Inside J.D. Vance's mind, thoughts churned. He'd faced tough interviews and intense political debates, but this felt different, more personal, more real. The troll had forced him to confront not just policy positions, but the emotional core of what it meant to be a public figure who once lived the struggles he wrote about. He recalled his own family members, the nights he lay awake as a child, fearing the next crisis, the desperation he felt while trying to navigate an unfamiliar world of higher education, the sense of betrayal when institutions seemed stacked against people like him. Those memories fueled his empathy, but they also fueled his frustration. Why did it take a public confrontation to bring this troll's humanity to the surface? Why couldn't they have had a civil online conversation months ago? But he knew the answer. Anger is easier to express in anonymity than vulnerability. And in the digital age, raw anger can gather a following faster than thoughtful discourse. Yet here they were, in a single auditorium, bridging a gap that felt insurmountable online. When the forum resumed, the crowd settled back into their seats. The troll didn't return to his spot against the wall. Instead, he chose a seat near the front, within direct view of the stage, a quiet statement that he was no longer lurking on the sidelines. Vance resumed the Q&A this time. The questions came from a place of deeper understanding. People asked about specifics of policy, yes, but also about how to maintain civility in such polarized times. "What can we do to make sure we don't all turn into trolls?" asked a gray-haired woman near the stage, her tone half joking, half serious. Vance smiled, glancing at the troll who offered a small grin in return. "We can start by remembering," Vance said, "that behind every screen name is a person. We can question each other, debate hard, but never forget respect." Applause broke out again, reverberating off the auditorium's walls. By the time the event wrapped up, local news outlets had captured the confrontation, and subsequent reconciliation on film clips circulated rapidly on social media, sparking headlines like, "J.D. Vance and his biggest critic meet face-to-face, and it ends in a handshake." Some netizens were inspired, praising the moment as a triumph of civility. Others were skeptical, labeling it a political stunt or media moment. Late-night talk shows picked it up. Pundits dissected the exchange, highlighting the troll's emotional confession, and Vance's empathetic response podcasts devoted entire episodes to the question, can face-to-face conversations heal the rifts that social media inflames? The troll found himself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. He received messages from strangers, some supportive, thanking him for speaking up, others mocking him for selling out or backing down. "It's weird being on the other end of the trolling," he admitted in a tweet. "Maybe I deserved it, but it still stings." Away from the cameras, the troll, whose real name was Brian, sat in a small one-bedroom apartment, staring at the dusty corners of his life that he'd neglected while he was consumed by online arguments. Jobless for months, his finances teetered on the brink. He had initially vented his frustrations online, aiming them at political figures like Vance figures who, to him, symbolized broken promises and unattainable hope. But now, a shift had begun. He started to wonder if anger alone was getting him anywhere. He found himself drafting an email to the community center that had hosted the forum, inquiring about volunteer opportunities, about local resources that might help him get back on his feet. His heart pounded as he typed each word, uncertainty gnawing at him. What if they recognized him as the troll from that viral video? Would they dismiss him, laugh at him? Yet he pressed send. The next day, he received a response, polite, welcoming. They encouraged him to attend a workshop on community engagement and gave him contacts for job training resources. No waiting list, no bureaucratic runaround, just a direct invitation to step forward. Of course, the story didn't end with the roundtable. As news circulated about Vance's ongoing interactions with his former troll, the media's narrative split. Some outlets lauded it as a heartening example of bridging partisan divides, others dismissed it as a staged friendship or political theater. Headlines emerged. From troll to advisor, the curious case of Vance's unlikely ally. Sincere outreach or calculated optics. Late-night hosts joked about it in monologues, teasing the notion of politicians hugging trolls online. Forums flared with debate. Some praising the effort, others insisting it was all for show. Vance found himself explaining over and over that the goal wasn't to turn a critic into a friend, but to demonstrate that conversation can be more productive than hostility. Brian scrolled through coverage of the story, torn between frustration and resignation. He realized he'd become a symbol now, an emblem of the possibility that even the loudest critics can transform. Behind the media noise, real progress began to unfold. The community center reported a surge in volunteers after the viral confrontation. Local donors and businesses pledged additional funding for training programs, citing the public interest sparked by the Vance troll story. An upcoming job fair was doubled in size, with more employers signing on. Intrigued by the newfound attention, nonprofits collaborated to streamline resources, aiming to reduce wait lists and bureaucracy. Brian attended one of the skill workshops. Feeling awkward at first, but found himself surprisingly motivated. He discovered an interest in IT, a field he'd never seriously considered. The program facilitators encouraged him, praising his quick learning and adaptability. Slowly, threads of hope wove into Brian's daily life. He emailed Vance's office updates, brief notes, not fawning but appreciative, highlighting which programs were working and which remained bottlenecked. To his surprise, Vance would often reply personally or have a staff member follow up. They discussed ways to secure more grants to expand this approach beyond Cincinnati into neighboring counties. Not everyone welcomed the changes with open arms. Some local politicians felt threatened by Vance's rising popularity, accusing him of grandstanding. Others resented the attention Brian received, suggesting he was a professional victim. The tension boiled over during another public meeting, this time at a regional summit that aimed to coordinate job training efforts across multiple cities. A local official stood up, pointing a finger at Brian. "You're no hero. You just trolled a politician online, got your 15 minutes of fame, and now you're reaping benefits." Brian's face turned red, but before he could respond, Vance stepped in. "Let's keep this constructive," he said, voice firm. Brian isn't claiming to be a hero. He's sharing his story, one that mirrors thousands of others struggling in this economy. The official scoffed, crossing his arms. "You talk about solutions, but it's just talk, talk, talk. All I see is political grandstanding." A wave of whispers swept the auditorium. Reporters smelled drama, readied their cameras. Brian took a deep breath, voice shaking slightly as he spoke. "Look, I'm not trying to be a poster child. Yes, I said some hateful things online. I regret it, but I'm here, trying to be part of the conversation, part of the fix. Is that grandstanding, or just a guy trying to learn from his mistakes?" Murmurs of support filled the room. The official, confronted by this calm rebuttal, backed down, but not before muttering about career politicians and their lackeys. Over the next few months, tangible signs of improvement took shape. The workforce training program reduced its wait list from 6 months to 6 weeks. New mentorship initiatives popped up, Pairing unemployed individuals with local business owners, Brian landed an apprenticeship at a tech startup, working a few hours daily while continuing his training. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start, an honest path forward. He moved out of his cramped apartment to a slightly bigger place so his kids could visit more comfortably. The bitterness that once fueled his online posts began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. J.D. Vance, for his part, stayed involved. Though critics accused him of milking the story, he showed up for monthly town halls, met with local leaders, published updates on the progress, and continued to emphasize that real change takes time and collective effort. On social media, the narrative shifted yet again. Some users hailed the blossoming partnership as proof that civil dialogue can yield results. Others questioned the sincerity of the troll's transformation or Vance's motives, but a growing number of voices started asking, how can we replicate this elsewhere? What if trolls and politicians in other communities tried talking face-to-face? Activists on both the left and right began sharing the story as an example of bridging divides. Universities invited Vance and Brian to speak at forums on constructive discourse. The swirl of negativity around politics momentarily dimmed in the glow of a more hopeful possibility. In one of their last public appearances together, the pair found themselves in a hallway outside a symposium where they'd just spoken about the importance of face-to-face dialogue. Sweaty from the bright stage lights, Brian wiped his brow with a handkerchief. Vance leaned against a wall, his tie slightly askew. Funny how life turns out, Brian muttered, half smiling. A year ago, I was making memes calling you a sellout. Now we're up there telling a bunch of students about the value of understanding each other. Vance chuckled softly. It's been a wild ride, no doubt, but I'm glad you gave me a chance, and I'm grateful you let me understand what you were going through. Brian shrugged, looking away for a moment. I guess I needed to be heard. You actually listened, and that made all the difference. A brief, comfortable silence ensued, a nod of mutual respect passing between them. Reporters ambushed them as they headed to the exit. Any final words for people out there who might be in the same position you two were? A local journalist asked, thrusting a microphone forward. Brian hesitated, then answered, It's easy to assume you know everything about a person from a few headlines or tweets, but if you can, talk to them in real life. You might not agree, but you'll at least see each other as human. That changes everything. J.D. Vance chimed in. As I said before, none of us have all the answers, but if we keep the conversation open, honest, and respectful, we can find solutions together, even with those we once saw as enemies. The story continued to evolve. Some criticized it as a feel-good anecdote that didn't address systemic inequities. Others championed it as proof that personal connections can soften even the hardest stances. Think pieces sprouted across online publications, from trolling to talking. Is this the future of political discourse? When enemies meet, the value of genuine communication in a polarized era. Podcasts debated whether this was a one-off event or a replicable model for bridging divides. Political scientists studied the phenomenon. Sociologists explored the underlying dynamics of anger, empathy, and redemption. Meanwhile, Brian slipped back into a quieter routine, focusing on his new apprenticeship, attending therapy, and trying to mend the rift in his family. He still posted on social media, but his tone shifted drastically. Instead of spewing anger, he asked questions, sought dialogue. Some followers stayed, intrigued by his transformation. Others unfollowed, disappointed he'd lost his edge. J.D. Vance faced the demands of his political life, campaign appearances, legislative duties, and an endless stream of interviews. Through it all, he didn't forget the lesson he'd learned. Behind every angry face, every online troll, could be a story of pain, frustration, or heartbreak waiting to be heard. A year after that first confrontation, the community center organized a special event, a celebration of new beginnings, highlighting success stories from job training programs, addiction recovery efforts, and local youth mentorship. Brian was invited to speak briefly about his journey. Nervous but determined, he took the mic and recounted how his life had changed since that night. He thanked the volunteers who guided him through workshops. He thanked the community for the chance to start over. Then he looked out at the audience, spotting J.D. Vance seated in the second row. Most importantly, he said, voice trembling slightly, I thank those who listened even when I was hostile, even when I doubted everything. Applause filled the hall. Emotional, raw, and resonant, J.D. Vance took the stage afterward, delivering a speech about how community support and honest dialogue can move mountains. He didn't boast about his role or frame it as a political achievement. Instead, He credited the volunteers, local leaders, and individuals like Brian who dared to break through the digital walls of hostility and step into the human reality of conversation. As he wrapped up, Vance addressed the crowd with words that echoed across the room. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Never underestimate the power of a face-to-face conversation. You might still disagree. You might still clash. But you will at least recognize each other's humanity. And from there, solutions become possible. In the weeks that followed, media coverage waned, new controversies and scandals took center stage in the news cycle, yet the ripple effects of J.D. Vance's encounter with his online troll persisted in quieter corners. Local nonprofits reported record volunteer sign-ups. Job fairs in the region saw an uptick in attendance. Forums on civil dialogue popped up at universities and community centers, referencing the Vance troll story as a case study. Brian continued his apprenticeship, eventually landing a full-time job in IT. He reclaimed shared custody of his children, re-establishing a semblance of stability. Did all his problems vanish overnight? Hardly, but the shift from cynicism to engagement opened new doors. J.D. Vance pressed on with his political career, shaped not just by polls and party lines, but by the lingering memory of how a single personal conversation could catalyze broader action. Friends and acquaintances teased him, saying he should write a second book about bridging digital divides. He'd laugh it off, not sure if the world needed another cautionary tale or redemption arc, but in quieter moments, he pondered it, realizing how many Brian-like stories were out there, waiting to be heard, just like the moment when Barron Trump chose calm resolution over retaliatory anger. J.D. Vance's choice to engage a critic in genuine dialogue stands as a testament to what can happen when empathy overrides ego, when substance supplants sound bites. This story reminds us that behind every harsh tweet or online rant, there could be genuine hurt or unmet needs, and that in-person conversations, real, face-to-face dialogue, can reveal the humanity we often overlook in the glare of digital screens. Thank you for watching and listening. Stay engaged, stay empathetic, and remember, words can wound, but they can also heal. Choose wisely.